Right now, the life and legacy of Senator Frank Lautenberg, a man who throughout his entire career never forgot that he was just a boy from Paterson. And next, we'll be joined on set by Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. He'll give us the inside scoop on what is or isn't happening in D.C. And later, is the GOP overplaying their hand when it comes to the IRS scandal? You won't believe the war of words that's going back and forth between this man and the White House. Question is, will this help or hurt Republicans when it's all said and done? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks so much for joining us this Monday evening, June 3rd. We begin tonight with the sad passing of New Jersey Senator Frank Lautenberg, the 89-year-old who earlier this year announced he would not be seeking a sixth term in the Senate. He passed away early today following complications from viral pneumonia. Lautenberg, he was never the flashiest member of the Senate or even the New Jersey delegation oftentimes. Instead, he was known more for his unwavering faith in government as a force of good and his behind-the-scenes efforts to get things done. And as senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman shows us, over his 30 years in the Senate, Lautenberg certainly did get a lot of things done.
He was a progressive Democrat who served the progressive Democratic-leaning Garden State in the Senate for 30 years. Becoming the oldest senator ever elected from the Garden State, and the only person the state ever elected to the Senate 5 separate times. In that time, he championed health and safety laws we now take for granted. No smoking on airplanes, and a nationwide drinking age, 21 and over only. And some health and safety issues still up for debate, like expanded health care coverage. And Lautenberg was long an advocate for greater gun control, years before Newtown or even Columbine. He was the Senate's last veteran of World War II, after the service becoming chairman and CEO of payroll services giant ADP. For New Jersey Democrats, Lautenberg was twice the go-to man in times of crisis. His first election followed the resignation of Democrat Harrison Williams, who resigned in a corruption scandal. Lautenberg retired in 2000, but immediately regretted the decision. And in 2002, when new Senator Bob Torricelli was also besieged by scandal, Lautenberg replaced him and won again. He even oversaw the construction of his unofficial memorial. Long an advocate for transportation, transit, and infrastructure spending, Lautenberg pushed for a new train and transit hub in Secaucus with a new turnpike exit to get there. The name? The Frank R. Lautenberg Rail Station. Frank Lautenberg was 89 years old.
And for more on Senator Lautenberg's legacy, we're very pleased to be joined by Jim McGreevey, former governor of New Jersey. Governor, nice talking to you as always.
Rich, great to be with you, my friend.
Hey, it's a sad occasion, though. Frank Lautenberg, for many of us who covered him, especially in recent years, I know with failing health, but he reached that point in his career where he basically said whatever he thought, consequences be damned, and he was always good to me, and you know, and I mean this in the best way. It was a piece of work. He was one of a kind, and I know you had affection for him as well. And in 2002. When Bob Torricelli was forced to step aside, you got behind Senator Lautenberg for a return to the Senate. What about him for you felt that he was the right man at the right time for New Jersey?
Well, Rich, many of us always thought that Senator Lautenberg said what he wanted to say and everything else be damned. It was only with age that we thought he had a reason to do that. But you know, Frank came from the hard scrabble of Paterson. He was able to serve this nation by wearing this nation's uniform. He built up a tremendous business, but he always saw himself. I remember campaigning in Paterson, and we were carrying the Lautenberg banner as we crossed the Great Paterson Falls. And he had such a great sense of pride of where his family came from. He was very much attuned as to his father's early death, and he understood it to be because of environmental and chemical causes. So we always believed in the American dream. And he said to me, you know, it can't be a dream just for my generation, but wherever a child is born in New Jersey, in this nation, by virtue of hard work, education, and sweat equity, they ought to be able to do whatever it is they put their mind to. And so he was passionate about that. And even though he achieved financial wealth, ironically, he would drive some of his peers crazy because he was committed to early childhood literacy, to job training, to affordability of college education. And so he had a real middle-class sense of I'm going to give back and continue to invest in America.
I know you know this, Governor, but for a lot of people who just associate, well, Jersey politics, well, there's one guy who'll say it like it is, that's Governor Christie. In some ways, Senator Lautenberg was the same way, and in ways that would really touch and impact people's lives.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I mean, I would cover these annual dinners where he would say something, there'd be nervous laughter, and he'd double down on it. He loved to kind of stir it up. But
yeah,
to that end, I mean, talk about for a legacy. I mean, he's the guy who made sure you couldn't smoke on an airplane or in federal buildings. He's the guy who said you had to be 21 anywhere in this country to get a drink. He's the guy who put the blood alcohol levels. These are real things that saved real lives. People might not know it here, but thousands of lives were saved by this legislation.
Yeah, and Rich, to your point, I mean, Senator Lautenberg had small, I don't want to say small bore issues, but bore issues that touch people's everyday lives, that impacted, whether it was transportation, whether it was banning for somebody convicted of domestic violence from having a permit to own a gun, investing in infrastructure. And, you know, there was also, when you're down in the U.S. Senate and people are getting in and out of the Senate elevators, you know, Frank Lautenberg would stop to talk to that child or that elderly person. He was always had a wonderful sense of personal connection, that this wasn't just about the process, as good as he was on that and as good as his staff was, but there was also a sense of one-to-one. I remember when I was mayor of Woodbridge, I mean, I would go down there and to beg, and he said, Jim, you're just like a son. All you do is come in here and ask for money. But we were trying to invest in infrastructure projects in my own hometown, and he knew about the project. He knew about the length of construction, and so he really understood the importance of not only listening but caring about what other people said, and that's why, frankly, he passed legislation that, in retrospect to his long and storied career, legislation that arguably changed and saved people's lives.
I would just like you to share with people, because everybody I knew that worked with him, whether it be in New Jersey or covered him, he'd make a point about talking about the silk mills and about places where he said, I was going to make it and I wasn't going to go back to that, but at the same end, he was going to look out for the guy who had to call that a job. He always looked out for the little guy, didn't he?
Yeah. He always looked out for the little guy because he saw himself. You saw himself as that little guy. He never lost the sense that he was the son of a Patterson worker who died an early death. And so imprinted in his own sense of story was very much the American dream, that even though my parents had come here from a foreign land, I made it because of America. I could have worked just as hard in any other country, but I would not have achieved the same promise, the same success. And so to give back is to make sure that that America is still present.
Finally, I'm curious, because you saw him at different chapters in his life. He regretted when he first left the Senate, and he wanted to go back. And obviously, you encouraged that in 2002 when you were governor. But by the end, every conversation I had, he talked about how bad the Senate had gotten in recent years and how it was different from the Senate he kind of grew up in. He really thought, and I don't just think it's, you know, wishing for the halcyon days that weren't, he thought the Senate had gotten worse. And he really thought it was day to day, the grind was getting to him.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't, I remember when Senator Torricelli decided not to pursue office, and I spoke to Senator Lautenberg, and he was enjoying his children, and particularly his grandchildren, and enjoying being, if you will, retired, arguably for the first time in his life. But there was something that he was still edgy, he was still wanted to get back into the game. But in these latter years, the game had become so acerbic. And I think, you know, Frank, you know, he had friendships on both sides of the aisle. I mean, clearly he was among the most partisan of Democrats, but he had personal relationships. I mean, the way you would in the business community, the way you would in the veterans community, that transcended party affiliation. And so I think he was frustrated that everything descended into a partisan vote. And he saw this deadlock in Washington as being something that was at odds with a better, a higher public purpose, and clearly something that was at odds not only with the presidency, whether it's Republican or Democratic, but with the interests of the nation.
And I think it's kind of telling. It says a lot about him. At the age 89, even from at that point recovering from an illness, in April he showed up for his last vote in a wheelchair for the gun control measure that didn't pass. I think both the sign of where we are right now, but also about him, that he would put himself through that for that important vote here. But Governor, I really appreciate a few minutes. And he was a one-of-a-kind. He was a genuine article. And you always knew where you stood with Senator Lautenberg. And I think we don't have enough of those guys.
No, and Richard, thank you for giving such a great tribute to such a good and decent man. Thank you, my friend.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back here, we'll talk to a few more lawmakers in New Jersey, members of the New Jersey delegation, about Frank Lautenberg, and also talk about the political consequences of Lautenberg's passing. Who will fill the very large shoes he's left behind, and who will Governor Christie pick for the next year or so? Now, before we go, we leave you with a few words from the governor himself.
It's no mystery that Senator Lautenberg and I didn't always agree. In fact, it probably is more honest to say we very often didn't agree. And we had some pretty good fights between us over time. Battles on philosophy and the role of government. But never was Senator Lautenberg to be underestimated as an advocate for the causes that he believed in and as an adversary in the political world. I think the best way to describe Frank Lautenberg and the way he would probably want to be described to all of you today is as a fighter.